Hey YouTubers, thanks for coming back, and I've decided to finally drop the hammer and do this. We have before us the eFX Boba Fett PCR helmet that I have done my extensive repainting to, and I was just going to go over that process. A little bit I guess can be said just to kind of recap on what the eFX Boba Fett currently is to me, and what I believe, to the market of licensed, at least, Boba Fett helmets. Um, Again, bigger and better as we get better technology and better access to things, and they can make better things. My deep in my heart love is always going to stay with my Dawn Post Deluxe Boba Fett, but the eFX Boba Fett, as far as again what's currently available and licensed, is, in my opinion, the best you're going to get for a proper Empire Strikes Back version. I'll say the RS Prop Master Return of the Jedi Special Edition that they do, or they've done, or doing, is top shelf as far as accurate physical Fett, and accurate to the special edition version of it, which is really the Empire helmet with the additional but additional wear and damage and extra paint jobs that have been done to it over the years due to its weather being worn from all the displays that's been on the road tours and handling and braking, and it's significantly and noticeably different than ESB proper, and that's what they used in the Return of the Jedi Special Edition scenes, was the actual Empire Strikes Back helmet that had all that extra weathering and damage to it, and that's cool, and I definitely want one. But I also wanted Empire Strikes Back. And up to this point, the eFX was the best and most accurate licensed Fett out there. Master Replica's Fett was it for a while. And I regrettably don't have a Master Replica's Fett. I mean, the completist in me wants one, but my wallet is not really agreeing with the ridiculous prices that these things are going for out there. Do you hear me, collectors? You guys are being ridiculous. Um, Especially when you've got pieces out there that are superior, and now you're trying to get top dollar for an inferior product. I get it that you're trying to, make money off of once what was, but it isn't anymore. It's physically a good product, but it is not accurate. But I guess it's falling in line where the Dawn Post helmet was for a while. They're marketing it on its former glory, and I get it. But if they come down in price, I might think of getting one if I can find one. But for right now, here we go. Again, eFX using the original helmet, which was the special edition one, to make the cast their mold from, to make this, is where it's important. So, as with the RS piece, the molds that eFX, or I should say the casting that eFX pulled, touched the same surface as the mold as the original helmet. So you've got a direct one-to-one lineage there. And yes, they had to make, just because of the way they had to piece this together as a plastic, PCR of ABS plastic, and it's not all one piece. So they had to segment it to put it back together, which I'll discuss my distaste with how they did that. But they got it back and pieced it back together to arguably near perfect dimensions. They've cleaned up some things that are currently on the prop, but I don't believe were on screen. Like there was a little blowout on the right cheek bubble that you can see in the Braille prop, but I have yet to see it on screen. I don't know. But things like that, they cleaned up. There's some damage, I think, some little nicks and gouges that are here that are just not as present as on the real prop, or on the RS, like the RS casting, because of the way that they pulled this and then had to recast the plastic pieces. I guess it just softened them up a bit, and a lot of people feel that eFX could have gone in and fixed that and cleaned up the gouges to be a little more present, a little deeper, a little more relief to the dings and the nicks in it. That being what it is what it is, and I love it. But again, what I'd said before in my previous videos, the problem the big problem, other than anything else that I've had with the eFX helmet, is that the paint job was incomplete. Everything that was on it, absolutely accurate, but they were missing a good 10% of the paint, the rest of the paint job that's on the real helmet on screen. That I really feel that they just missed. They dropped the ball, and they could have done a better attempt at it. And subtleties that aren't quite like stand out, like, hey, look at me at this color and this image, but subtleties to the paint job and to the weathering especially that were missed, and really could have made it a much better piece to begin with. So thankfully, I mean, I have enough ability to do what I needed to do to it, and the correct sources, thanks to the dented helmet and the stencils and the extensive research on the 4Ks of the film, which again, like my Vader repaint for A New Hope, were indispensable in putting the right thing together. So let's get to that. So I'm going to get up a little closer here and not worry about the whole helmet in view. We know what he looks like. I'm going to start with the coloring. So the coloring, that the cheeks and the dome were originally, not the original helmet, I'm saying eFX, before I weathered it here, but it's very close, and I'll show you in a little bit something that might illuminate that. They were matched to the helmet as best they could, and I think they really nailed it. I think they got the right color, which, as far as available, that's a little lit over here, but you can definitely tell the color over here. But let's go ahead and turn him so we can maybe get a little bit of that. Yeah, you really can see that good color there. In my opinion, the best matched currently available color out, there's one of them. There's a few of them. People mix and match colors and airbrush and get the right color, and that's cool. But as far as just a single one color that matches it, Tamiya Field Gray is it for me. That's my go-to. I've experimented with other colors when I was attempting to start doing this, and my Hasbro Black Series repaint for Return of the Jedi, which uses different colors, but during that phase I was experimenting with these as well. So I'm sticking with my Tamiya Field Gray for the cheeks and dome. And the back panel is going to be more of a I forget what I had for that, like a forest green, and a little bit of a black overlay to it, but I didn't have to really color that in too much. So the initial base colors I did not, thankfully, have to really go over, because that would have entailed doing the entire helmet. I would have done it. I did it for my Hasbro one, but I just wasn't looking forward to it if I didn't have to, because again, the piece itself was so nice. I really didn't want to screw it up. I just wanted to make it better. So the first thing I had to do really was study this thing extensively, as far as study the helmet that I had and what was on it, and really make mental and physical notes about areas, and what I knew of the helmet, where I knew things to be, and just kind of start there. Like, I know there's some obvious things that had to be done, and I would start there and say, okay, the fade stripe below the kill stripes, and the enhancing of the carbon scoring of the dent, and the little silver characters above this blob here in the front, and things like that were very obvious to me that needed done. Based on that, then I would go and look over the stencils, which they basically compiled everything that we know to be on the helmet. But there were some actual things on the stencils as I had gone through and looked at the 4Ks and been confirmed and reconfirmed some shots that, not much. There's like 2 spots that I found. Maybe I think it was a third, but definitely 2 spots on the stencils that they were indicating a location of paint that aren't or are not on the actual screen Empire helmet. Oddly enough, I mean, I thought maybe it was just, sometimes the angles of the camera, or the distance from the actor, or the lighting, those all do have an effect on it. But there are many shots where different angles, different lighting, confirming the same result, and I really was very assured of myself that I wasn't seeing things. So, making and going back and forth like that, and really documenting the helmet, studying it thoroughly, and then comparing it to what I'm finding on the stencils, and then comparing it to what I'm seeing on screen, and as far as location of paint and damages and so forth. And in doing that, I mean, the different colors that might be needed, which most of this was just any of the silver that I enhanced was done with Tamiya chrome silver. So that was a nice bright color to do, to make it look nice and metallic. And I didn't really have to mess with any of the medium dark grays or any of the light grays. Some of the white color I had to add and enhance and put on, and that was again just Tamiya flat white, not much to that. The red for the visor, I didn't have to mess with that too much, but the color that I was using for some touch-ups was the same color I used on my Hasbro Black Series helmet, which was Rust-Oleum Claret wine from a spray bottle, which I deposited an amount of it into a container for liquid and used a brush on it and just touched it up, and it worked fine. The scallops on the cheeks, as I was aware, is just originally black with a light gray spray over top of it, or light green, very, very misted light green to kind of bring it up. I didn't really have to mess with those too much. I just kind of left them alone. So, any of the enhancements that I had to do where there was dark color involved, I used a flat black or NATO black in some cases. NATO black is a lot more of a grayish hue to black, so I had to be careful with that. But flat black or gunmetal worked out for some of them. And then the rest of it, though, was using just Tamiya black wash, or the black panel line liquid, for enhancing the dark color areas by using the little paintbrush that comes with it, and really shaking it up good and getting some of the more condensed version of the liquid from the inside of the rim, rather than the more viscous liquid that you use for the actual panel line. And it made a really good kind of translucent darkness to some of the things that I needed to enhance without actually coloring over them. So that's what I basically did, was just study the helmet in depth, from all angles, literally, documenting everything I knew to be on it, comparing that against the stencils and updating that list, documenting all the colors that I would need and all of the things that I needed to do and how I was going to do it. So am I going to paint that? Am I going to panel liquid it? Am I going to use carbon, my carbon scoring technique, which is literally taking a block of art, like a canvas art, charcoal, and rubbing the tip of a Q-tip over it to really collect the charcoal. Excuse me. And then carefully dabbing it and applying it and strafing it to achieve carbon scoring, and things like that. So that was that was it. First, really documenting everything and going over it that way, and then physically, which place to start first. I could have started with anything, but just to give myself like an easy thing to do that I know needed done, I started with the rim here in between the visor and the dome. There was a noticeable gap there previously, so I was going to use some putty initially, and I decided to use, I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I decided to use like a clear silicone gel to adhere that, thinking that it would be a little more flexible to get in that gap, and it was. I mean, it literally it filled that gap very easily. But the problem I started having is when it was drying out and I needed to remove the excess from it, it was literally like just crumbling in little rubber granules and pulling out of the gap, almost leaving it completely, just where I started. But it did actually leave enough in the gap. I mean, I was almost no silicone was left. It was just enough in the gap for me to really fill it with the colored paint that I needed, which I mixed a combination of light gray and rust brown, more to the light gray shade of things to make it kind of look like, weathered, rusty color, and just kind of really took a brush and just really labored it in, just kind of lathered it in, and while the paint was still wet, I would just take a Q-tip, press it up against the edge of where that was, and just pull it across to help push that down and actually wipe it off at the same time to get the excess off. So carefully did that all the way around the back, and getting in all the cracks, and it leaves a little nice layer on top of the visor, as you can see as it goes around, a little layer of color to indicate a little bit of residual there, like the helmet has. So I started with that first. I mean, there's other things, obviously, as I'm turning the helmet, you can see that stand out, but we'll get to that. So I just want to give myself something easy to go do and start with, and I'll be honest with you, as soon as I did that alone, that set off the helmet from just, again, one of those subtleties that you don't really realize about the helmet till you see it. If it wasn't there, then it shows up there, then you notice it, and yeah, it makes sense. So started with that first. Of course, I guess I have to preface this by saying I taped up the visor very carefully to avoid any paint getting on it. So yeah, I did that with a special pull away hobby tape that won't leave film. So anyway, so we start with that, and started just basically going with the things that were actually the easiest to do first, and then the more time consuming and then labor intensive, I would do at the end, which is all the weathering and the damage, because you really figure that, you don't want to put paint over damage, you want to damage over the paint. So I decided the next thing to do was to get the little faded line under the kill stripes. Again, very much overlooked on many replicas. Even master replicas missed it. I don't get why it's a very obvious part in the helmet, and especially when you have access to the real helmet like master replicas did, and so forth. I don't know why there isn't any. I don't know if I want to say any excuse why not, but hey, they missed it. Now the funny thing is, for all of that, the Black Series Fett helmet actually did have a bit of the faded line under the kill stripes. So the cheap Hasbro Fett helmet actually paid more attention to the paint job than the more expensive eFX job. Go figure, in a way. So I ended up having to do this by trying to duplicate how they got it to begin with. So I layered some tape to the bottom of the kill stripe, lines of the kill stripes, and cut the tape off where I could see it stopped on the real helmet from the references on film and in the stencils, and mixed up on some test paper a very translucent, a very thin mix of light green and some light aircraft gray, just to have a little bit of a green hue, not much. Just I had to play with it. I went through a couple different variations of it, and mixtures of how much thinner to put in it, so it was very liquid and you can see through it a bit. So I got to what I thought was good and applied it, and when I got it on, the color was good, but it still wasn't really as see-through as I liked it. So I considered, just wiping it all off and repainting it. But then I noticed when I was referencing some of those screenshots that there's variations to it's a lot more. Let me put you down for a second so I can turn this here. It's a lot. It varies where it's like you can see back here where it's a little bit actual brighter, and then it gets a little thinned out, and then a little brighter, and then it thins out again. So there's variations to the transparency of that fade on the film on the helmet. So really what I did is, again, just with my trusty Q-tips, I just dipped the Q-tip in the thinner and just very carefully rubbed the thinner and over places that I needed to fade more, and left the other places faded where I needed them. I had to kind of bring them down a little bit. They were still a little too thick, but I left them more intact. But I mean, I would wipe down the areas that needed to be see-through a little more until I got them to where I wanted them, and gave me a very, I think, respectable version of the fade line. So again, when that gets put on and you see it, and then you start seeing things all coming together, like you got the visor gap color in there, and then you got the fade line in there. Everything almost was kind of like, I could have almost stopped there and been, those are enough that really the helmet really started filling out. But I knew there was a ton more, and we're looking right at the next one. And that's where I went to next, was the white smudges, the infamous thumb smudge and white smudges on the helmet. Again, very obvious piece on the helmet why that could not have been even just referenced. Just put a little white blob there somewhere, guys, and you could have done it. But, whatever. So I ended up having to go in, and the same way, references from the stencils were very helpful because of the actual shape and orientation of them and positioning of them. How much of the white came down below the band line, how wide was it from the kill stripes, just a lot of that, and looking at it on screen as best I could. And so I literally just hand painted the outside image and matched the shape of the blob according to the stencils, and I did the same thing with the white that goes across the kill stripes. Just matched the outside trace form of it, and then filled in again using Tamiya flat white paint, and filled in the paint, the whole image full. I mean, I know there's the relief areas there, but so what I decided to do was do the same thing I did with the kill stripe line, was get in here a little close to that, was to paint it in and then wait for it to dry a little bit, and then went and started just lightly dabbing at it with a Q-tip dipped in acrylic thinner until it started liquefying the paint a little bit, and I started just moving the paint from the center outward towards the line until it faded where I needed it to go, and it enhanced the outside definition of the white blob to where I wanted it. And did the same thing with the top piece, which had an obviously more fade to it and was thinner and more see-through, but just did the same thing. And I had to play with that a little bit. I actually had to go in and repaint both of them twice and then redo the fading thing until I got it to where I wanted it, but got it where I wanted it. And between each of these steps, I was not doing them right after the time. I would do one thing, like I did the band visor thing, and I just left it go for the day, and the next day I came back at it, gave it a whole 24 hours to just sit and get out of my head. Did the same thing when I did the kill stripe fade. Did that in an evening and just put it down and let it set until the next day, and I came back at it. Got the white smudges done, and actually it sat for a few days because I was doing other things, but I just didn't want to really over stress myself with it. I wanted to come at this with a clear mind, and that I'm having fun doing it, not like I felt like I had to. Which brings me to this. This is definitely the next thing I wanted to tackle because it needed it desperately. So the carbon scoring was printed on the helmet around, and correctly, in correct placement. But again, it looked painted on. It didn't look like there was actual real effect of the way carbon is. And on top of it, these two score lines at the top weren't even there. I had to put them in and match them to how far they came back and get a proper fade to them, and so forth. And then what I did was the painted on carbon scoring, I just enhanced it with the same way I made the additional carbon scoring with the Q-tip and the charcoal block, and I left it painted on, but just dabbed it on to kind of give it a haze of carbon around it. I didn't really have to do too much. You just dab it on, and it kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of hazes out on its own. I mean, it dusts out around the edge on its own. So I did that around all the areas where the carbon scoring was, and pulled it back to match it as I needed to. And I had to extend it a little bit back here. I did the same thing, but not as much to the areas down here. And back and forth, had to redo these scores a couple times, and it was hard to get the charcoal off. It was a little bit more difficult because it's not a chemical. It's actual charcoal, and it gets in your real microscopic surface areas, and you got to get it off of there quick if you didn't do it right, or really kind of get a paper towel with some hot soapy water and just a little dab of it and rub it in, and without messing up other things, it can be a problem. But I thankfully got it to where I needed it, and there we were. And then while we were at the dent, the paint of the dent in the normal version of the helmet looked good, and it was nothing wrong with it. But the silver just didn't have that silvery thing to it. I don't know if it's picking it up in here or not. I mean, where you can see kind of a reflection, but it looked a little two-dimensional. So I went over it with the Tamiya Chrome Silver and painted over the silver areas. I did not paint over the dark area spots or the white enhancements. I only painted over the silver to really kind of give it the more dimensionality to it. And as a side note, before I did the carbon scoring, I guess maybe I was talking a little bit ahead of my time. The silver areas around the carbon scoring, I did that first because I knew carbon scoring was going to go over it. So that and said, I did paint the dent first and then did the carbon scoring. So, oops. But, there you go. And I also filled in that little blob here at the end. They were, the outline was there. Where's my finger at here? The outline was there for this piece. And they didn't fill it in. Weird glitch with the paint. And as much as I looked at it, I did not see an outline on the real helmet one. It just looked kind of like a little blob like that. So I just filled it in and just let it look kind of randomized that it was there, but it's filled in there. That being said, in order to, kind of keep what I had without things getting wiped off, I took a can of Rust-Oleum matte clear finish and just real gently kind of hit around the corners, the ridges of the visor where I painted the white brown color, and hit around the tape area, and then hit over top of here just to seal it all in so it wouldn't go anywhere and rub off. Not much, just a light misting of it, and then let it dry for the next day, and came back. And because the other thing I found over painting the other helmet is if you kind of, even though you're using a clear, if you blob on or lay it too thick, it actually messes with the translucence and the light bouncing off of the color, even though it's a clear. So you got to be careful with that. But a very light distance misting just to kind of lock in the paint at the time as I move on. So then I knew that I was going to do all the dark colored weathering last, so that wasn't an issue. But the next thing to really hit was to go around and start enhancing all the rest of the silver damage, and then adding the missing pieces that were not on the helmet. So first thing I did was one I always noticed. I mentioned it earlier though, was the pieces right above this blob here, and really had to go in and really get that right, the placement and the angle and the curvature of the lines and the orientation to each other. And I got it to where I wanted it. I think it looks good. And there was a little bit of a haze there that I don't know where that came from, but I couldn't get rid of it. I think it might have just been from the trying to erase the line and redo it. But to be honest with you, some of that damage actually looks like it's on the helmet, and I'm just leaving it to looking like a scuff mark. I don't really need to go in and screw with that. So adding that, and then down here where the turn signals are, I had to go in and add some missing components of silver, and some little areas of silver around it, like the two little notches there. And then there's this area here, right below this triangle, these two pieces of silver that were actually on the eFX version actually connected, but on the film version, on the actual film helmet and the stencil, it's separated. So again, a little paint glitch on eFX, stuck them together. So rather than erase them, I took my trusty Tamiya field gray and just put a little bit on a brush and kind of went and made it right where I wanted it, and lo and behold, it's the same color as the green behind it. It can't even tell that it was together at some point. And a little bit of a light green blob there that showed up on the helmet, on the film. Little dark spot I had to add there. Some of the things I had to remove. One of the other things I had to remove, which we'll get to that, I guess now, was there was some detail up in here. Actually, I forget where it was now. It was right around this area. It was one of these little dark spots that showed up on the special edition helmet, but it's not on the Empire version. I was actually looked thoroughly on the Empire version, and it's not there. So I took that out. The other thing that I took out was down here on this rim. Now there's silver damage and paint here, which is correct, but eFX continued the silver damage down this way to the point where it looked like this. I mean, there's very barely noticeable like a color at the bottom. It's just the real helmet on the film version. Again, extensive views of the 4K, many shots confirming it, different lighting, different angles. It's just some weathering here. So I actually had to go and erase, use sandpaper, like a 800 grit, and kind of sand down the silver, and then just kind of go back over it with some of the charcoal that I use and some of the weathering liquid, the black panel liquid, and using a Q-tip with a little bit of thinner just to shape the weathering on the way down. And then going in again, there was a lot of places I'd have to really go back with the stencil and document each one for you, but just suffice it to say, little things like little dots that I would find of silver around the helmet that were missing, I would just put them in as I'm going around the helmet, like, oh, there's a dot, ding, 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 there's a dot, ding, 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 and kind of just work my way around it. Then I found this. On the real helmet and on the stencils, there is this smattering of black damage. This is on the Empire version, right here. So I had to go and add that in and try to get the shaping and the amount of dabs and so forth proper without looking too added on. I mean, I was using a flat black, but even though I was using the flat black, it was like, it looked like I painted on with a marker. It was that much of a contrast to the helmet. So I went in and with a paper towel and some thinner, just dabbed on the surface of it, just pushed down on it for a few seconds to just kind of release some of the paint into the towel to kind of lighten it up a bit. Not wiping in it, just a dab, push for a second, and release. And so what you're doing is you're emulsifying the paint with the thinner and allow some of that paint to draw back up into the fabric on the paper towel, and then just lift it up and away from it. You don't have to wipe it off. It just, when you get it soon enough after putting it on. I mean, if it's set in and kind of cured with the air, it's a little harder to do that. But when you first put it on there within a few minutes, that's the best way I found to do it. And not a lot of thinner, just mildly damp with thinner. That's all you need to do. Just enough to emulsify the paint, and then it draws it up into the paper towel, and you just pull it away, and it just lightens it up. And you just dab it that way, and be careful that you don't over dab and double the image somewhere from the paint that came back up on the thing. So it was kind of tricky to get that down, but I got it down. And then again, little specks around the helmet that weren't there, adding some of the silver stripes back here into this quadrant needed to happen. Oddly enough, down in the back panels wasn't really much. I mean, there's a couple scrapes and dots and things that weren't there, but I barely had to touch it. I really went over that and looked, and all of the paint and the damages were accounted for, except with some of the highlighting around the back. I enhanced that a bit with some silver around the key slots. It wasn't quite as it looked as it should, but did that. So the back panels actually kind of got away with the least amount of work. Just added a little bit of a enhancement to the silver where I could find it on the entire thing. Some of the we'll get to the weathering, but I had to end up going up and taking some actually enamel thinner, and toning down some of the grease spots that are up there. They were a bit, like there's a greasy spot there, and that was on the eFX helmet, and they're actually there, but the eFX paint job was just a little too, it looked a little too greasy. It didn't need to be that. And there was a couple places where I went in, did the same thing though. I had to rub that down a bit to get it started, but it was the dabbing process to kind of just lighten it up once it got emulsified, started working. Those are, and I'll get to the weathering here finally, but those are the majority of the paint points and what I actually had to go around doing. The side ears here were pretty good. I didn't really have to mess with that too much. I mean, just again enhancing the silver a little bit on the rims and the edges to look a little more of a wear around the edges and the corners. A little bit of weathering up on the stalk, but not much. I was surprised I barely had to touch that. But this is the big but. Over here, as we're talking about the ears, this side, the paint and the shape, the image and the structure, the paint image at the bottom of the flange of the ear on the left ear was accurate and was correct. The right ear over here, however, was not, because it was there, but it was completely reversed the opposite way. So I literally sanded that all down, repainted the bottom as close to the yellowish tan as I could match, and then by hand repainted the silver and the weathering as it needed to be, and then weathered that appropriately. So I had to make a good modification of that. That was the only thing I really had to, other than the weathering on the cheek on the other side. That was the only thing I really had to kind of take off and redo. And but it was one of those things that I almost missed. And I remember going over it and reading some documentations on the stencils, and people, somebody had mentioned something about that, and I said, oh my god, I never even looked at it. Went and looked at it, and sure as there it was. So everything else was getting done, and I decided, you know what, I'm not letting this go, even though it was already painted, and just had to do it. If you're gonna do it, do it. So I got that finally, and I felt happy about that. Everything else, again, some of the paint on the helmet, even though it was accurate, it looks like it was printed on, because it was. This always has stood out to me, this particular place and some other things like it. So I did my best to kind of elude that by, again, just painting silver over it very carefully, not messing with the actual paint. Going in and really matching the existing paint, just painting over it so it looks like there's paint, and then using some of the weathering liquid to around the rim of it as they painted it, kind of filter down that a bit so it doesn't look like there's like a lip, like it was a decal or something. So then that brings me to the weathering part of it, I suppose. The first thing I did, other than the dent on the helmet, was I had to actually go in and weather the triangles appropriately to kind of give them, excuse me, a little bit of a rust color that builds up in the bottom corners, and I just had to do it just enough to get it right. This one doesn't have as much as the other one, and then a little bit of darkening on the inside of the corners, which forced me to go in and have to repaint that silver, because I had painted it silver before and then realized that the weathering had to go in there and it covered up that silver too much, so I had to repaint it. That was a pain, but whatever. So what I started with was using the Tamiya black panel liquid. For something this big, for areas that I would need to weather, I would just brush it on with a brush, liberally applying it, and then just either wipe or dab it off with a paper towel or a cloth as needed. But because of the way that the weathering on this was and how as much surface area needed to really have all the weathering, and I wasn't just going to just pour the liquid on this thing and let it run. So I saturated a portion of a paper towel and literally would just take hemispheres of the dome first and just wipe the liquid all over it, a complete even coverage of liquid, so it looked like the whole half of the helmet was covered in this dark liquid. And then I would just start dabbing away where I wanted the relief to be, more of a relief, and then wiping as I needed more relief, wiping that away, and then dabbing the areas around it to kind of blend in so they don't look like they were just wiped off. So there was areas that really kind of showed that, like the forehead area here is lighter noticeably than certain areas around it. So I would dab that more heavily and wipe it more heavily, like generic random circles, so it doesn't look like it was patted on. And then take a clean part of the paper towel and then just dab around that lightly enough to kind of fade it out into the rest of it, and then would dab out the rest of it so it's not just sitting there with this heavy black liquid on it. And before doing something like that, I would recommend anybody who decides to do that, practice that first on something else to get used to to get used to how this liquid works, because it is a wonderful, wonderful weathering tool, but it is absolutely tricky to work with and can bite you in the rear if you're not careful with it. So I did that, over the entire helmet. The cheeks, I didn't have to do it too much, but I didn't have to apply as much, but because it was a smaller area, but did the same thing. I just completely went in and colored the scallop and the side cheeks, and then wiped and dabbed as needed, and so forth. Now, in talking about this, I did notice one other piece of weathering that I forgot to mention. There was a area that was not as enhanced as it should be under the helmet of I suppose this would be like a rust, what they're trying to get away with, but a yellowed area here, and there was a yellowed, let's see if I can see an area back here, right in this area, and that was a very light but weird looking yellow color on the. You could see it on the Magic Mystery Tour. Sounds like the Beatles. The Magic and Myth and other artists, Star Wars museum tours that the Fett helmet appeared in, and you can see with the bright high res flash color pictures how apparent that yellow area really was. But those are making it look worse. I mean, they're just a flash image can really kind of trick the way things look. So finding that, knowing that was there, seeing it actually on the some shots on the 4K of the film, I'm like, oh wow, you can actually see it. So I didn't really have any yellow on me other than a bottle of just Tester's yellow. I mean, plain old yellow enamel, and just basically dipped a brush, kind of a tattered brush, in some acrylic or enamel thinner. Dab that into the opening lid, the cap rather of the paint, and then just kind of dried off the excess on a paper towel, and then just lightly started applying the yellowing around where I wanted it, and then gradually pressing harder as I was dabbing it until I got the shape and the color, or the thickness of the color that I wanted, the basics of it, and then would go in with, again, the trusty Q-tip with a little thinner on it technique and just dab away from it until it got to where I wanted it. So little things that I've seen other people miss too. Not you good guys on the forum, on the forums out there. You guys nailed that, but I'm talking about licensed pieces. I mean, again, little things that are missing. That if some nobody like me is finding these things and doing them, people with money and resources and access to the real thing should have no excuse to not put them in. I'm just calling you all out on it right now. I know there's money in production things and whatever, but when you're charging hundreds or close to $1,000 for somebody, you're calling it a replica, you better make it a replica, so that's, so I guess in that tone of voice, part of this was me kind of flipping the bird up to that issue. And so I am happy, though, that I came away with what I feel is a good upgrade to the helmet, a respectable and accurate upgrade to the proper Empire look of the helmet, and it will remain in my collection as long as I feel it necessary. And if somebody comes along and says, you know what, we are going to make a licensed, completely accurate Empire Fett, I will certainly put my money down, and I will keep this because this was mine, right? And I have a little pride in the things I do, and I keep them. But I would certainly welcome a licensed, accurate Empire Fett if it ever comes down the pike. So yeah, that's I guess most of my and the weathering that I did for everything else I did on the rangefinder and the stock and everything else. So just everything got the same weathering treatment. And in actuality, I went up to the weathering to the stock here, and well, a little bit, you can't really tell here for some reason. Weathered not with paint, but just a little bit of weathering, like sanding down the corners. You can see a little bit there to kind of look like it weathered out a bit, but that wasn't really too much of a necessity. It looked pretty good as it was. But I'm hoping that the colors come across well and it looks good to everybody, because I think it ended up being a good representation. And we'll be waiting to be partnered with the RS version whenever they are able to get back in the swing of things after their unfortunate experience last year, which took them out of making their Fets for a while, and I feel horribly for them and everybody else that had to go through that. But I will be there to help them out and put my money down when they're ready to put these things out. So, all right, that's it, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me for the much more long talk than I thought I was going to be on this. But if you have any other questions about it or any additional things you'd like to add to my weathering techniques or hints or advice, absolutely feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear it. Like and subscribe. Always keep it civil. And talk to y'all later. Bye.